Welcome, dear students. The current session is about diachronic changes in language. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand the term diachronic, and you would also be able to understand what is the significance of diachronic changes in the study of any language, and particularly with reference to the English language. Well, my dear students, diachronic linguistics is one of the two main temporal dimensions of language study identified by Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. Diachronic linguistics is the scientific study of language change over time, where you trace the development and change through the times. Principal concerns of diachronic study include to describe and account for observed changes in particular languages over the time. Well, if we try to dissect and to see how this term diachronic itself is created, in fact, the term comes from dia and chron, which means throughout and time. So, the term itself suggests throughout time, the evolution, the development, and the changes in a language are to be studied in it. Diachronic linguistics, my dear students, is the study of language through different periods of history. If at a particular time point, this is how language is, how it has reached at this time point, through the changes that took place linguistically and historically through the times. In fact, it maps shifts and fractures and mutations of languages over the centuries. So, for instance, the Great Wall shift through the times. For instance, how certain, spellings changed from, the Old English to the Middle English, or from the Middle English to the modern English. For instance, how vocabulary expanded from the Middle English period to the early modern English period, and then particularly how it further expanded very rapidly from the early modern English period to the late modern English period. What were the reasons? What were the historical factors? How it happened? Why it happened? Etc. If I just try to give an analogy or give an example for a comparison, I would say in gross terms, it is similar to evolutionary biology, which maps the shifts and transformations of rocks. A synchronic linguist, and I repeat, a synchronic linguist would just look at a rock and would describe how it is and what it is and how it is different at that time point when he or she observes it from another rock. But from a diachronic perspective, when a diachronic linguist or a historical linguist looks at a rock, like a biologist, he would trace how this rock has taken this shape or this form. Now transfer this analogy to language. For a historical linguist or for a diachronic linguist, the study from diachronic perspective would mean to trace how a particular element or a feature in a language is formed or is shaped or is transformed, or it has undergone some mutation, how it has been dropped on the way, etc. If I have to give some examples, I would say tracing the development of English from the Old English period to the 20th century, if you are looking at it through the times, it is more like, this is, of course, a diachronic study. The question is, why to do diachronic studies? Well, there are patterns which simply cannot be discerned without looking at a language at multiple time points. Why? For example, the irregular verbs in English language exist in a particular way. Probably we cannot answer this until and unless we go back into the past and we explore that, and then we get very valid reasons for how and why it is so. Diachronic analysis, in fact, is the domain of historical linguistics. Sometimes the terms are used alternatively as well. Well, because devices of recording sounds, they were not found in the old times. It's only until recently that we have them available. So, for historical study of language or for diachronic study of language, most of the times the data is in the form of texts, written texts, not in terms of, sounds, because we do not have the records available. However, wherever in any situation spoken records are available, of course, they remain the primary evidence for the diachronic study of language, because, after all, mainly language is what is spoken. We can study different kinds of language change. What kind of language changes actually can be studied in diachronic linguistics? The answer is almost all the possible kind of linguistic changes at all the levels. For example, phonetic, phonemic, morphological, syntactic, and semantic changes over the times can be studied. I would just give you a few examples quickly. For instance, for phonetic changes, Old English had the sound, this umlaut, while, that sound is no longer present in modern English. Coming to phonemics, Old English regarded this allophone f, while in Middle English, v is a phoneme in itself. So, this f was used for both f and v in Old English, but today we have separate f, separate v. Quickly moving over to morphological changes that can be studied in the time context. Old English had case endings on, normal nouns to distinguish indirect objects and direct objects. Modern English, of course, does not have any such kind of marking. By the way, this use of ME is for modern English. If we move on to syntactic changes, Old English allowed all the questions to be formed by inverting the subject and the verb. Whereas modern English only allows this with auxiliaries and uses do otherwise. So, for example, she is beautiful. The question can be made, is she beautiful? Otherwise, modern English doesn't allow this inversion, and, the use of do or does have to be introduced. When it comes to semantic changes, I will give a very interesting example. The word girl, for example, in Old English, it was used to refer to both young men and young women. It was not gender specific. It was only for, with reference to age, being young. Anyways, my dear students, the terms diachrony and synchrony, they both refer respectively to an evolutionary phase of language and to a language state. Diachrony refers to an evolutionary stage, moving, changing over the times. Synchrony refers to a particular state at a particular time point. In reality, says Theophile Obenga, who is one of the linguists, that in reality, diachronic and synchronic linguistics interlock. What he means by that is that, if the diachronic and the synchronic perspectives are taken, at a point they meet each other, they support each other, and they are complementary.